This is Day to Day from NPR News. I'm Alex Chadwick. Loss, memory, regret. Writer Kazuo Ishiguro explores these issues masterfully in all 6 of his novels. The most famous, The Remains of the Day, is set in England just before the Second World War, and his most recent work, Never Let Me Go, is set in contemporary England with a disturbing twist. Kazuo Ishiguro spoke to Day to Day's Karen Grigsby Bates for our Wednesday book report.
Kazuo Ishiguro's newest novel, Never Let Me Go, begins when the narrator introduces herself.
My name is Kathy H. I'm 31 years old, and I've been a carer now for over 11 years. That sounds long enough, I know, but actually they want me to go on for another 8 months, until the end of this year. That'll make it almost exactly 12 years. Now, I know my being a carer so long isn't necessarily because they think I'm fantastic at what I do. There are some really good carers who've been told to stop after just 2 or 3 years. And I can think of one carer at least who went on for all of 14 years, despite being a complete waste of space. So I'm not trying to boast. But then I do know for a fact they've been pleased with my work, and by and large I have too. My donors have always tended to do much better than expected. Their recovery times have been impressive, and hardly any of them have been classified as agitated, even before 4th donation. Okay, maybe I am boasting now, but it means a lot to me, being able to do my work well, especially that bit about my donors staying calm. I've developed a kind of instinct around donors. I know when to hang around and comfort them, when to leave them to themselves, when to listen to everything they have to say, and when just to shrug and tell them to snap out of it.
Kathy's very existence is a controversial part of the book. Her mysterious occupation is revealed early on, but if you want to maintain a little frisson when you discover it yourself, Ishiguro has a playful warning.
A spoiler alert, if people don't want to hear this, they can leave the room. But, okay, left the room. All right, so the story is about a group of young children growing up in the English countryside, and they gradually start to figure out that they are special, they're different. And they're special, they're different because they are cloned children. And they gradually start to figure out what their purpose in life is. They've been cloned so that they can donate their organs.
To produce the healthiest possible organs for donation, the children of Hailsham, an exclusive boarding school deep in the English countryside, are carefully protected and lovingly nurtured by their teachers and administrators. Yet despite their obvious fondness for the students, we'll discover that the teachers, while proud of the job they've been entrusted to do, are also tremendously uncomfortable with their charges' human appearance and inhuman status. Ishiguro says he remembers this conflict between doing the right thing but not much enjoying it from a job he had early on.
I've worked with homeless people in the past, and I've noticed that same kind of tension. That feeling at a social or political level that you want to help homeless people, knowing in your head you shouldn't be repelled by them, either physically or in terms of their personalities, but actually the day-to-day reality of dealing with these people is actually very difficult.
That devotion to duty, often at the price of one's personal happiness, suffuses many of Ishiguro's works. In Never Let Me Go, the cloned children, for instance, accept without argument why they were made and for whom. Their normal lifespan will be shortened to half that of humans. Organs are harvested from them one by one until they weaken and die, or in the book's euphemism, complete. But they don't question or rebel against their fate. Ishiguro says their circumstances seem normal to them.
But they live in this enclosed world. They live just amongst others like them. So that's the only life they know. And to them, that's the natural lifespan. And far from feeling that they should rebel or run away, they feel a certain sense of duty to do these things well.
Duty is almost a character in Ishiguro's most famous novel, The Remains of the Day. The tale of Stevens, a self-effacing butler in an English greathouse just before World War II, won universal critical acclaim and was made into a popular movie. In this scene, Stevens, played by Sir Anthony Hopkins, has just been informed by his colleague, Miss Kenton, played by Emma Thompson, that his elderly father, who trained him in household service, has died in the servants' quarters upstairs. Tragic and inconvenient, as Stevens' employer is hosting a historic gathering downstairs and expects Stevens to make sure all runs smoothly.
Will you come up and see him? Well, I'm very busy at the moment, Miss Kenton. In a little while, perhaps.
In that case, will you permit me to close his eyes?
I would be most grateful, Miss Kenton. Thank you. Thank you. Miss Kenton.
Yes.
My father would wish me to carry on with my work. I can't let him down.
Both The Remains of the Day and Never Let Me Go are saturated in a kind of wistful fondness for a time in life that is past and won't return. Decency rather than self-indulgence, patriotism, not nationalism, an order that is universally understood. Kazuo Ishiguro.
It's almost like that kind of nostalgia is to the feelings, to the emotions, what idealism is to the intellect. It's a way of holding in your memory a picture of a better world than the one we find ourselves in.
Of course, the world portrayed in Never Let Me Go is more complicated than the narrator's initial perspective would suggest. But the novel strongly conveys the belief that time moves very quickly, whether we're humans or the book's clones.
I was trying to celebrate the kind of the small decencies of human beings set against this dark background that's in all our lives. Is actually that we all live with a countdown going on. I was talking to one of my donors a few days ago who was complaining about how memories, even your most precious ones, fade surprisingly quickly. But I don't go along with that. The memories I value most, I don't see them ever fading. I lost Ruth, I lost Tommy, but I won't lose my memories of them. I suppose I lost Hailsham too. You still hear stories about some ex-Hailsham student trying to find it, or rather the place where it used to be. And the odd rumour will go around sometimes about what Hailsham's become these days. A hotel, a school, a ruin. Myself, for all the driving I do, I've never tried to find it. I'm not really interested in seeing it, whatever way it is now. Mind you, though I say I never go looking for Hailsham, what I find is that sometimes, when I'm driving around, I suddenly think I've spotted some bit of it. I see a sports pavilion in the distance, and I'm sure it's ours. Or a row of poplars on the horizon next to a big woolly oak, and I'm convinced for a second I'm coming up to the south playing field from the other side. Once, on a grey morning, on a long stretch of road in Gloucestershire, I passed a broken-down car in a lay-by, and I was sure the girl standing in front of it, gazing emptily out towards the oncoming vehicles, was Susanna C., who'd been a couple of years above us, and one of the sales monitors. These moments hit me when I'm least expecting it, when I'm driving with something else entirely in my mind. So maybe at some level I am on the lookout for Hailsham. But as I say, I don't go searching for it.
Kazuo Ishiguro says many people read Never Let Me Go as straight science fiction, and that's fine with him. But when he reads before an audience, there's another reaction that pleases him more.
The people who said, this is a very sad novel, but there was something also quite affirming in it, because the characters are so decent. That response is probably closest to what I was trying to get at. You know, the fact is, yes, we will all fade away and die, but people can find the energy to create, you know, little pockets of happiness and decency while we're here. In this novel, Never Let Me Go, the kids start off in a kind of boarding school, and they're literally sealed off from the rest of the world. But at some level, I think most childhoods are like that. I mean, I think most childhoods should be like that. Certainly, when my daughter was younger, I tried to keep her in a bubble, sealed off from the realities of the world that actually awaited her. Even though physically, we took her everywhere. And it struck me how quickly even total strangers would enter into this conspiracy with myself and my wife to keep her in this bubble. Everybody wanted to censor out the sadnesses of the world. They desperately wanted this little child to be deceived about how nice a place the world was. Strangers passing in the street would turn themselves into little Disney cartoon characters and talk in a funny voice. We all seem to instinctively feel this urge, and those of us who, I hope, the majority of us who are lucky enough to have this protective bubble early on, I guess, we might look back to that And we realized that, okay, we were fooled to some extent. But perhaps we hold in our hearts, to some extent, a memory of a time when we thought the world was a slightly kinder place than the one we eventually found it to be. And so I think that sense of nostalgia is quite important. It's almost like that kind of nostalgia is to the feelings, to the emotions, what idealism is to the intellect. It's a way of holding in your memory a picture of a better world than the one we find ourselves in.
You are Japanese, which would probably confuse some people merely listening to you because they can't see you. Born in Nagasaki?
That's right, yeah.
Moved to England when you were about 5 years old, and grew up there ever since. It's interesting, I read somewhere, I believe it was an interview you had with The Guardian, that you said your parents, who have lived in England as long as you have, still consider themselves Japanese living amongst the English. You, on the other hand, what do you consider yourself?
Oh, I consider myself British, I suppose, because, I've grown up and I've been shaped by Britain. I've been educated entirely in Britain. But on the other hand, when I was growing up, I grew up in this home, home with Japanese parents, speaking Japanese. Perhaps most crucially, yes, in this home where my parents didn't have the attitude of immigrants, but of visitors, temporary visitors. The idea was that we'd always go back within the next 2 years. And so I think perhaps I did grow up observing the English around me at a slight distance, and many things that my friends thought were absolute right and wrongs that they'd been taught by their parents. I realized that they were just tribal customs, because that's how my parents regarded them. Particularly the England I arrived in 1960 was still a very, nominally anyway, a very Christian community. People went to church. There were all these things to do with good manners and protocol that were very important. And of course these things were very different within our house. So I was always taught to respect the English manners and mores, but they were very much the what the natives did. And something like the English class system was something I felt on the outside of, whereas I think all my friends grew up very, very concerned about class because their parents were, whereas my parents couldn't even interpret the class signals, and we didn't really understand. It was like a cold civil war going on in the country between the classes, and I was kind of on the outside of it.
Which might have been for the best.
Yeah, I would say it was.
Are there similarities between the two countries in terms of, I'm looking at Never Let Me Go and thinking again how reserved some of the people in the books, in this book are. We tend to think of the Japanese as reserved, at least in their interactions with us. I don't know, when they go home and close the door at night, maybe all hell breaks loose and we have no idea what's going on and it's a party all the time. But in general, we tend to think of them as emotionally withholding to a certain degree, very concerned with protocol, perhaps in a different way than the British are, but still to do the correct thing, to not give offense, to present oneself as a civilized person. Am I overreaching? Are there commonalities between the two that you've observed? Between
the British and the Japanese, you're talking about? At that kind of surface stereotypical level, I think that is true. But I think that's just on the surface. But yeah, there is a certain kind of style, a surface style that is very similar, which does have to do with restraint. That's seen to be elegant, to be emotionally restrained. But I think that's purely at the surface level. Just traveling around the world, I sense that every community, every nation has its own set of strategies for actually protecting the inner emotions. And here in America, people do, particularly on the West Coast, I notice people do seem to be more open at one level. In that, you meet somebody and they do start telling you about their life and their they tell you about their divorce and all these
whether you
and
want
their
them to or
breakdown.
not.
But I, over the years, and I've been coming to America since I was 19 years old, I can't help feeling that this is just another strategy, that there is a kind of there's almost a kind of a set of statements, almost like a personality that's been carefully constructed for presentation purposes. And it's quite difficult to get beneath this first presented figure that talks about the divorce and how they felt and whatever. I mean, it's just another way of putting up a shield. I found the fear of emotions, the fear of exposing oneself, that is universal in almost every culture. It's just that different societies have a different way of different kinds of protection, different kinds of armor.
What do you want readers to take away from Never Let Me Go?
Well, that's a very big question, but I guess when people have come up to me at these events and tried to sum up their response, the ones I've been most pleased with probably are the people who said, "This is a very sad novel," but that there was something also quite affirming in it, because the characters are so decent, but it's terribly sad. That response is probably closest to what I was trying to get at. The fact is, yes, we will all fade away and die, but that people can find the energy to create little pockets of happiness and decency while we're here. I'm probably less excited when people come and say, "Oh, this is a chilling warning about the way we're going with cloning and biotechnology." That's fine. I'm perfectly open for people to read it that way. But if that's all they've got out of it, then I feel the kind of the inner heart of the book has been missed.
I would think that if I were someone who knew that the clock was ticking a little more quickly than for the rest of everyone else, this would be a comforting book, because part of what I got from it was the message to do the things that you want to do while you have a chance to do them, because you don't necessarily know how much time is unspooling out before you, but you do know what you have right here, right now.
I think that element has always been in my work. In a book like The Remains of the Day, books like that, I used to take, when I was a young man, I used to often look at life through the eyes of an elderly man, looking back. And I guess the message I was giving myself, and perhaps my readers, was that it goes by really quickly. Life just slips through your hands, and the opportunities just slip through your hands, and you often don't know what the key turning points were until it's too late. And you can have the best intentions, but because you don't have tremendous perspective, you can just let things go past, and before you know it, you have a wasted life. And that was, I guess, very, very much there in my earlier books. And although here I'm looking at young people, ostensibly young people, I think that same feeling is there. I've shortened their lives artificially, if you like, to create that same effect.
It's like that Bob Dylan song. I was so much older then, I'm younger than that now.
I guess so. That perhaps is a comment about the wisdom and energy of youth. And I sometimes feel, I don't know if I apply it to the themes of my book, but I feel that as a novelist sometimes, that I think novelists, I know I've been quoted saying this, and it's haunted when I was younger, and I've been haunted by it ever since, but novelists, perhaps not other kinds of writers, but novelists tend to peak, I think, around, in their 30s, just a few years after footballers. And you can check this out by looking in literary encyclopedias to see when most writers did their best work. But there's a tendency to think of the grand old figures as being the great writers. Well, they might be, but they're being lauded for work they did when they were young. And I sometimes feel like that. Interesting, that phrase from Dylan. I mean, I sometimes feel that the 25-year-old writer that I was could teach me a lot of things that today.
Well, here's hoping that you are truly middle-aged at 50 and we'll have you around for a while longer, and that you'll produce more and that you didn't peak at 32. Kazuo Ishiguro is the author of 6 novels, including The Remains of the Day. His newest novel is Never Let Me Go. He joined us here at the studios of NPR West. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you.